Many of us consume the news media in some form or another, whether it's online, on the radio, on television, or in the good old-fashioned newspaper print. And a lot of us have different perceptions when it comes to the media. And a lot of us believe the media is biased. Well, I got to tell you, I think a lot of people are right. But let's take a look at what the definition of media bias is. Media bias is the perception that the media is reporting the news in a particular or prejudicial manner. Media bias occurs when the media seems to push specific viewpoints rather than reporting the news objectively. Keep in mind that media bias also occurs when the media seems to either ignore important aspects of a story or admit it. So what is news? Well, that's a good question. News, in my opinion, really can be defined only two ways, but there's four different ways to say it. There's the news you know about, the news you don't know about, the news you care about, and the news you don't care about. Which means news is very personal to each individual person. There are things you may hear that may be a news story to some person, and things another person might hear that they say, what the heck, who cares about that? It all depends on where you are in your life and your particular journey down that life trail. So with today's media, how would you define media bias? Well, media bias really became a hot button issue beginning probably in the late 80s and early 90s, because there was basically three big media markets out there, and all three of them had what most professors and most people would admit was a, quote, more liberal media bias. Then starting in the 1980s, talk radio really started to come forward, and into the 90s that seemed to have more of a conservative bias. Television seemed to take on more of a liberal bias. Radio seemed to take on more of a conservative bias and drew different audiences those ways. But the ratings number was really what the big factor was. Then, starting in the late 90s, a network called Fox News was launched. And after Fox News was launched, the ratings numbers completely jumped over to that network, which marketed itself as being quote-unquote fair and balanced, something everybody wanted to hear, but the reality was, had probably a much more conservative viewpoint of the news, and a lot more of Americans began to identify with that and hadn't had that before. They filled the niche that wasn't there. That really began to show the partisanship in politics and in the media, because I think ultimately the big three networks felt that their dollars in advertising revenue were being threatened, which is why they began to, I think, react the way they do. It's why organizations like NBC, which is probably the most liberal media source out there, constantly likes to harp on any conservative media out there, like Fox News on episodes of Saturday Night Live and anything else that they can spin out there. But we have to be on the lookout for media bias. I often sit here and wonder, how would the Boston Tea Party be covered today if it happened? Would we actually be talking about taxes? Would we actually be talking about no taxation without representation? Or would the focus of today's media be on the pollution in Boston Harbor and whether or not the tea in there is going to have an effect on any other of the life forms that are down there underneath the water? I wonder. We had a recent incident where a gentleman flew a helicopter over the White House and landed it on the White House lawn. Obviously a security scare and an FAA violation. He did it to raise awareness about campaign finance reform. Unfortunately, that's a very boring topic. The big story to the media, and maybe to most Americans, was the focus on security at the White House. And probably rightfully so. What if that person had a bomb or something on them? Media bias, I do believe, is in the eye of the beholder. And you can see it in the number of stories that we've had out there that have really focused on one media or another. Hillary Clinton's run for office has obviously been touted by the left media as a big upswing for them. That's who they want. That's their gal. NBC launched a show called Madam Secretary, basically in order to boost that morale, to make it seem like she's more human and so forth, to make her seem more likable. There's a lot of things that we've seen with Benghazi and other stories that have obviously been led to look at one liberal administration or one liberal politician to look like they're going in the right direction when public opinion and the general census has gone the other way. The media still tries to pull that way. And that's why it's important to watch it. Because those that are undecided, that's what the media is trying to do. The media has an idea that it wants to teach you, it wants to educate you. And if it has a bias, it wants to teach you its way, not your way. That's why the most important thing is an educated individual. You need to be the judge for yourself, what you believe and what you don't. Don't let everybody else tell you what to believe. Read what you can. Come to your own conclusions, ask questions if you need to. Always be skeptical, but understand no matter what media outlet you go to, they're trying to sway you one way or another.